Herzlich willkommen bei Digitale Optimisten, der Podcast, der dir die erfolgreichsten Gründer und Ideen der nächsten Generation vorstellt. Und zwar direkt aus dem Herzen der Digitalisierung, dem Silicon Valley. Ich freue mich sehr, denn die heutige Folge dreht sich um das Thema Smart Home. Ich habe mich persönlich schon eine ganze Menge mit Smart Home beschäftigt, denn ich war bis vor einem Jahr Product Lead des Google Assistant, also die Sprachsteuerungsfunktion von Google, der auch in deinem Google Home verbaut ist. Smart Home war der Riesentrend auf der Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas vor mittlerweile 6 Jahren. Und damals überboten sich die Analysten mit Prognosen darüber, wie disruptiv Smart Home, das Internet of Everything und das Ganze drumherum sein wird. 6 Jahre nach der Messe ist mein Zuhause ehrlich gesagt immer noch ziemlich dumm. Ich habe zwar ein Google Home und ein Echo, aber so richtig verwende ich das nicht, wenn ich ehrlich bin. Ich habe kein Smart Fridge, keine Smart Toilet und auch keinen Smart Gemüseschäler. Mein Interviewgast Yana ist da schon deutlich weiter. Das erste Wort von Yanas Sohn war unfassbarerweise nicht Mama, sondern Alexa. Yanas Startup will Smart Home richtig groß werden lassen. Kraftful, so heißt ihr Startup, entwickelt eine Plattform, die alle Smart Home Anwendungen effektiv miteinander kommunizieren lässt. Ein echtes Smart Home soll die Heizung anmachen, wenn dein Handy meldet, dass du auf dem Weg nach Hause bist, den Paketboten aufmachen, wenn er ein Paket abliefern will, oder deinen Kühlschrank eine Bestellung bei Rewe aufgeben lassen, wenn die Marmelade alle ist. Eine ziemlich coole Vision und genau das will Yana mit Kraftful ermöglichen. Im ersten Schritt baut Kraftful at Scale Apps für Smart Home Anwender mit einem White-Label-Ansatz. Das heißt, sie baut mit ihrem Team für Bosch, Philips und so weiter die Apps, mit denen wir Nutzer dann die Smart Home Anwendungen verwenden. Mit dem Konzept ist sie ganz frische Absolventin des Y Combinators, einem der bekanntesten Accelerator der Welt hier in Silicon Valley und auch generell ziemlich erfolgreich. Wir sprechen darüber, wie sie aus einer Jura-Laufbahn ins Product Management gewechselt und zum Unternehmertum gefunden hat. Warum Yana glaubt, dass Smart Home jetzt endlich vor dem Durchbruch steht, wie man eigentlich eine effiziente App baut, was für eine Rolle Voice spielt, wie man eine Go-to-Market-Strategie aufbaut und wie man in den Y Combinator kommt. Ich freue mich sehr über deine Meinung zu diesem Gespräch auf www.digitaleoptimisten.de. Wenn du dich für Startups, Trends der Digitalisierung und mehr interessierst, dann melde dich unbedingt zum Newsletter an, in dem ich jede Woche die Dinge aufschreibe, die mich am meisten bewegt haben hier im Silicon Valley. An das Ende dieser Folge packe ich noch die 3 Sachen, die ich persönlich aus dem Gespräch gelernt habe. Und jetzt viel Spaß mit dem Gespräch von Yana und mir. Yana, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I have to tell you, I researched your digital footprint a little bit, and I can tell you I am very impressed. You seem to be interested in almost everything. I found That's publications true. On hacking bank accounts with biometric data, the power of diverse teams, B2B product research, and how to get into prestigious startup incubators. So there's a lot of stuff that you seem to be interested in. And on top of that, you're a Harvard-educated lawyer. And in your free time, you're a photographer and artist. So that is so much stuff. And first off, I've never felt so insignificant in my life talking to you. But where does all that drive come from?
That's interesting. I think, let's say some of the drive is more kind of like just my artistic drive. And that I think like half my family are artists or architects, and that's just like something that's been in the family for a while, and has always felt really natural. I think kind of more like the working drive, I would probably attribute that to my family, or I guess me personally, with my parents immigrated to Sweden when I was 6, and I saw them work really hard from like kind of establishing a life from nothing. and always felt like that's something that I would have to do eventually. And that's how, you kind of have to, that is how you get ahead. So I think like that's been a big driver for me, even kind of just growing up.
Got it. So maybe can you walk us through your background, your career?
Sure. So yes, you mentioned I started my career in law, which is quite, I guess, unusual for ultimately starting companies, unless you're starting a company in law, which is not what I'm doing. I originally studied law at London School of Economics, which was sort of very much into public international law. I was fascinated by war crimes. I was sort of on track to become a human rights barrister and wear a wig and gown to court every day. And then I got a American law degree and instead sort of went into business litigation. I worked at a company called Sidley Austin, was my first job. It's a big kind of multinational law firm, but it's mostly well known for where Barack and Michelle Obama worked and where they met.
Oh, wow.
And so that was sort of where I started off. But I think I very early realized that regular type of law is not the kind of thing I'm really interested in, and the kind of impact that I wanted to have in the world. So I think early on thought that what I wanted to do was to redesign law to work better for people. So then I went back to school and went into academia. I had a quick stint as a law professor, and my kind of research focused on essentially how to replace legal policies with user interfaces in technology that can communicate information to people in a way that's more intuitive and more informative.
Terms of what's it called again? The terms of
how can we remove terms of service and privacy policies and all those things and make sure that just from interacting with something you understand the rules of the game intuitively. Like how do we make sure that everyone who is online or interacts with some sort of technology knows what's going to be the case for them instead of having to read things that they ultimately actually never read.
Wait, are you saying people don't read those terms of services? that's news.
Right.
Okay.
I'm sure you read all of them.
That's interesting. So, okay, then you were in law, you had your stint in academia, but you were always adjacent to the business side of things.
Yeah.
But then something must have happened because then you made a big decision, I think.
Yeah. So I transitioned. Actually, first I went back to practicing law fairly quickly after being in academia. So I went back to being a lawyer and specifically became an in-house lawyer at Wikimedia, where I got to kind of apply a lot of my research to, like billions of users on Wikipedia, which is really cool. But then very quickly realized that the kind of thing that I'm interested in is really to impact people's lives in a big way and build things generally that would help people, not necessarily through law or law related. I think that's kind of when I realized that actually it is something between entrepreneurship and product, and I didn't really necessarily have a very clear like this is the role that I need to do, but I felt very clearly that it shouldn't be in law, it should be in somewhere else.
So you found, okay, you have to change something, right? Mm-hmm. Law is great, and you obviously had a lot of success, but now you're thinking about entrepreneurship and product. So what do you do to kind of scratch that itch?
So I think I was really fortunate to be at a place like Wikimedia, in that at that point I was sort of more in a sort of management role. I was managing multiple legal teams, and I had sort of the freedom to also work on other projects. And so some of the things I did was I led the transition of Wikipedia to HTTPS by default, which was sort of a really big product initiative, and also ended up being one of our sort of most successful launches, which is, I think, I'm trying to remember how time-wise how that related to other things I was doing, but I also led a strategy team with like PMs and design managers to analyze readership data and kind of decide the strategy on Wikipedia readership. And so those two things, I think, were sort of very organic ways in which I moved into product without officially doing it. Like my job description was still legal director, and I was still leading legal teams. And meanwhile, I was sort of taking on responsibility. I was technically not part of my job description, and realized that this is sort of much more the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. And started thinking about how do I kind of do this kind of thing full time, you know?
What are the different skills that you need when you're a legal director versus being a product manager?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
That's a great question, because I think that I always practiced law as a PM. And I didn't realize that at the time. And I think looking back at it, that's exactly how I was different as a lawyer. I was always thinking about what is the problem that I'm trying to solve and how do I solve for that problem the best? And as opposed to thinking about what are the legal frameworks and how do I apply these legal frameworks to the world, which I think is kind of like how most lawyers practice law. And so I think for me, the skills were actually the same. But for a lot of people, they kind of practice law in a different way.
Okay, so maybe one other thing is you have this extensive, I do want to dwell on it a little bit, you have this extensive legal background. Are there still things that you really learned that you could apply in your product management career?
Definitely. I think a lot of it, in not necessarily so much in product management as entrepreneurship. There's a lot of just plainly legal work, like negotiation and structuring agreements and that kind of stuff, where I get to plainly leverage some expertise that I have that a lot of startup founders don't have, and they kind of have to be nervous about working with lawyers and trying to figure out what the rules are, and I sort of have that in my experience, which has been really helpful. I think the way I've practiced law has been very much focusing on how do you, like, what's the best legal application. So that kind of gives me an unfair advantage in that I can think about not only what's the easiest legal solution, but what's the best legal solution to the problem we're trying to have, or to the problem we're trying to address. No one's ever trying to have a problem.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so you're a product manager at Wikimedia, you're kind of leading this huge launch, but then you would make another decision.
Yeah.
When did you know that it was time to make another move in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about that a lot recently. I think I knew very early on that I needed to do a change like that in my legal career, though I didn't quite know exactly where I needed to move. And the further I got into my legal career, the clearer it became where actually I needed to be and kind of what sort of roles I needed to take on. But it kind of became more and more difficult over time. Like the higher up the I guess legal ladder I got, like going from associate to law professor to like legal director and leading teams, I think it just became harder and harder because ultimately, when you change career paths, you often have to start from the bottom, right, from the very start. So I think I was lucky to get to transition kind of in an organic way and work on some projects while still being a lawyer, and then be able to build on that and kind of just then look for my next role to be a product role, while technically already having been a PM for a while.
But somehow you developed an interest for smart home along that way. How did you move into smart home?
Yeah, so I think smart home is very much a convergence between kind of my personal interests and professional interests. So I am or have been a very early adopter of pretty much every kind of smart home device. We have everything from like smart lights and plugs and more mundane things to kind of like connected heaters and humidity sensors and air quality sensors and all kinds of things that we've thought about, like clever ways to put together and have new experiences with. So that was sort of my own personal fascination. I've also sort of have a ton of connected fitness devices that I try to use in creative ways. I then went on and joined IFTTT or IFT, where I very directly got to work on connected devices and smart home devices. And I think that's essentially where I got to leverage more of kind of my personal interest in more consumer IoT, which is where I realized that there's so many problems with consumer IoT that can be solved, and got me to where I am today with Kraftful.
And if means if this then that, and this is, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of the basic algorithm. If I wake up or if this happens, then this smart home does that, right?
Exactly.
That's kind of the basic
Yes.
idea.
So the premise is essentially connecting all the connected devices and other kinds of connected products out there, not necessarily devices, right? There's a lot of things on the platform that are kind of more services, like banks and Domino's Pizza and cities and all kinds of things. It's essentially anything with an API, and then thinking about what are the kind of new experiences that can be unlocked when you're able to connect everything in your life.
Got it. Sounds cool. So before we talk about Kraftful, I do want to talk a bit about smart home. And the first question, what is smart home? How do you define it?
Yeah, I think there's actually quite a lot of definitions out there. So maybe I'm just going to give you my personal definition, how I think about it. So to me, smart home is essentially technology in the home. It can be appliances, it can be other kinds of devices that you can control remotely somehow. Usually it is internet connected, but there's also some devices that are sort of just like remotely Bluetooth controlled from your phone. And the idea that when you're able to remotely control a device, you're also able to automate it in different ways, to be able to kind of turn on your lights when you wake up, or put things on your shopping list when your smart fridge senses that you're out of yogurt, right? And then the last piece of that is then to be able to connect all of those devices together, to do new things like turn off your lights when you leave home and drive away from your home in your connected car, or to be able to order new things through Amazon Alexa when things are running low in your fridge.
Why do you think people need a smart home? What's the number one reason why people invest into smart home?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a really well-functioning smart home can be really convenient for pretty much anyone. I think there's some very specific situations where people actually need it, like people with disabilities could really benefit from having a smartphone where they're a smart home when they're able to kind of have things happening in their home with them actually needing to get up and do things. Elderly population can benefit from smart home because they don't necessarily need to interact with it as much, but it can sense what's happening around them and potentially alert caretakers to come in and do things when things are sort of, there's certain abnormalities. I think just, busy people. As an early parent, I found lots of use in a smart home. My husband and I used Alexa so much when our son was born a few years ago that he learned how to say Alexa before he learned how to say mom.
Really?
Which is, I tweeted about that and it got picked up by Washington Post. I think there's a Washington Post article about my child.
We're going to link to that Washington Post article in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, I didn't know that. That is quite something. So maybe you can tell me about, so now we know that, well, the future of smart home is bright now that your son and children can say Alexa before they can say mom. But where do we stand now in the market? Are we at the brink of the explosion of smart home? Are we already there? Is it still out? What do you think?
I think we're just in the very, very beginning. I think the really radical change that happened for smart home pretty much in the past few years, but really came to a peak last year when the number of homes with Alexa and Google Assistant doubled to over 40%. I think at that point, in the US, I should say. In Europe, there's still a bit of a lag and suspicion around smart speakers, more so than here. But I think people were sort of getting their smart speaker and then thinking about, okay, what do I do with this? I need to connect it to something so that I can tell it to do things in my home, right? And I think that was sort of the first driving force for people, primarily to first get a light. That's the thing. Like people will, okay, I have my Alexa or I have my Google Assistant. The first thing I'm going to do is to get a Hue light or some other light. And then they start kind of getting more devices. So I think we're sort of just right now in this space where there's been a ton of smart home adoption for early adopters like myself. And now there's kind of more of the mainstream adoption happening. And that mainstream adoption is really challenging a lot of the companies that have moved into the space to do better, because they've been iterating on their products based on how early adopters interact with them. And that interaction is very different from what mainstream users do, right?
So when you say that we're getting to a point where smart home is going to be really big. And I think, well, what is going to change that will make more users adapt smart homes? Will the price come down? Is there going to be a killer application that is coming out? Is it a mix of both? But what makes you so optimistic that this is an area that we're going to see much more of in the future?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination between prices going down, and we've seen I keep talking about smart lights, but it is truly usually the first smart device that most people adopt or try out. And the prices of smart light bulbs have come down to almost kind of the same price as regular light bulbs at this point. And so it's something that people feel much more open to trying out. So suddenly, like, people are trying out this thing that they've been reading about. I think the other piece is, if we do it right, it's going to be user-friendly enough for more people to try to actually experience the benefits of the smart home and want to try it again and try another device and connect multiple things. But so far, that's not the case. I would say that most of the experiences are so difficult that someone purchasing a new light will try it out, and most mainstream users will not necessarily get a second device. They may not actually continue using it as a smart device. They may screw in the light bulb, download the app, try it out, and be like, well, it's actually easier for me to walk over to the wall and use the switch than it is for me to use this app.
The thing that I find interesting about your response is when I worked on the Google Assistant last year, we always thought about two things that we're trying to get right. The first thing was, how can we make this as easy to use as possible?
Yeah.
And how can we make it as useful? How can we inject value?
Yes.
And what you're saying on the first side, easy to use, well, people would say, well, I use my voice, so it should be super easy. I don't have to do anything. But you're saying, oh no, there's apps out there that actually are not very user friendly.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, what I gathered from your response was, on the usefulness side, well, there's more stuff coming. There's even smart toilets, smart faucets, all these kinds of things coming, right? That will kind of inject even more value into the whole smart home deal.
Yeah.
And one thing that I find on the first side, the ease of use, if I would just use my voice, wouldn't I even? Where's the room for an app in smart home? Maybe you can help me to understand.
And I think it's quite common for us here in the Bay Area to think that that's the case. But if you think about it from the perspective of more of a mainstream user, they are primarily purchasing the device oftentimes in a store, or even if they are purchasing it online, they get the light home in a box. They screw the light in, and then they look at the box and they follow the instructions for downloading the app. That's the mainstream user journey for interacting with a smart home device. So that's the way they will first try it out. And so voice is really not going to be part of that picture unless they have a successful first experience and know how that device works, what different features it has. You can change the light color, or you can make it adjusted for nighttime routines and things like that. But unless they can discover those features in a visual way first, they may never discover voice at all.
Interesting. So you're saying there's two paths to use the product. One is the app, and one could be voice down the road. But the app is usually the first entry point, and that's where... Interesting.
Yeah, for mainstream users. And obviously, like for early adopters, that's not at all the case. They kind of just skip that route entirely.
Totally. So let's talk about Kraftful, because now we've understood the market. What do you do at Kraftful?
Yeah, so what the big picture for Kraftful is much broader than smart home specifically. So our focus is to provide the software for all connected devices. So that's in homes, but also offices, factories, streets, think like scooters. And the idea being that right now there's all these like off-the-shelf software solutions for building any kind of online product, like AWS for hosting, or Stripe for payments, and Twilio for talking with customers. And we want to be that kind of off-the-shelf software solution for building a connected device. And today there's nothing like that out there. Where we're starting is with white label apps for smart home devices, because we found that there's a very specific need in hardware companies that are building connected devices, in that they don't have internal software teams and need a lot of help. And there's very kind of scalable ways we can help those companies be successful. And that's sort of our beachhead into providing software for the connected world, basically.
Got it. So you're trying to, you're conquering the whole connected device market.
Yes.
You're starting with the smart home market because there's an initial need for apps. But is your long-term goal, is it also like an angle of providing one platform that that is uniform across different, that can actually, I would think that if company A builds software X and company B builds software Y, they may not be able to talk to each other. Exactly. Is there also that is your idea of becoming that uniform protocol or software that enables all these connected devices to talk to each other? Exactly.
Yes, over time. So we're sort of starting with providing interfaces, because as I'm kind of, I guess, alluded to, from an end user perspective, a lot of users aren't really there yet. So to have the biggest impact on users today, we just need to make sure that the interface with a connected device is easy enough and useful enough for a mainstream user.
Your customers are companies that are specialized on hardware. For example, Philips built Huawei, a set of small smart light bulbs. Now, these companies have to build a piece of software themselves, an app. So do you do a bit of consulting yourself for these clients?
So definitely. There's definitely a way we come in and try to educate hardware companies that a really good software product or digital interface is built iteratively through kind of listening to your users and understanding how they interact with this device. And for a lot of these companies today, they are working with agencies that are building an app for them once, putting that app into the world, and then never looking at how users interact with that app. In fact, for most of the smart home apps today have no analytics, which is a thing that was quite shocking to us, coming in from kind of more of a traditional product management background. And so what we're telling our customers is that here's how you need to think about building a digital product, and we can do that for you. So our kind of idea is that we come in, we provide these white label apps that are already optimized based on all the learnings that we've had in the smart home space across all the companies that have been participating in this space. And then that's our baseline. And then we continue iterating on that baseline over time, but we do it at scale for all the hardware companies out there, so that they can get the benefit of that iteration without necessarily having to build up their own software team in a location where it's actually quite difficult to build up a software team or really talented software team that knows what they're doing, and without the overhead of having to have all the hidden costs of hiring engineers, hiring product managers, hiring designers, hiring usability researchers, and so forth.
So your value proposition is, you know what, Philips or whoever, and maybe it's not Philips, we're going to build you a super easy to use app for your smart home device. It's tested, we have we know what we're doing. You don't have to build. It's more cost efficient for you.
Yeah.
Here it is, and it takes us a lot less time than it would take you.
Exactly.
How does the white labeling work?
So the white labeling is these apps are templatized. So we start with a templatized UI that is we're primarily operating in 5 categories today. So it's smart lights, switches, thermostats, locks, and cameras. And within those, we found that there's actually been quite a bit of standardization in those markets, and those markets cover 70 or 80% of the smart home space today. And so we look at what are the kind of successful UX flows in that space. We then standardize it further, and then we improve it based on our own kind of user research and usability principles. And then that's kind of this template that we start from. What we then do is apply our customers' visual identity guidelines and branding to those apps so that they all end up looking unique and look like any one of their products. But the UX flow is still very simple to use. And so if you're a really savvy user, you may still be able to tell this is actually a Kraftful app because my camera app was simple too, and that was also a Kraftful app, right? But generally speaking, a user should still feel like this is any one of Philips' other products.
Got it. And how hard is that to do?
I think that the biggest piece that's hard to do is figuring out how to make really user-friendly apps. The kind of the customization or applying our customers' branding to the apps is much less of a complicated problem to solve.
And let me dwell on that a bit, because I also work in the app space now, and I'm more on the advertising side. But I'm still always concerned with the UX angle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what did you find out? I'm pretty sure there's no silver bullet, but is there like 2 or 3, UX principles that really stand out for you as you build these templated white labels?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's some things that are very unique to the smart home space, and it is that all of these apps are controlling a physical space that is around you, and so there's a lot of things we can do to model it based off physical learnings that people have just interacting with the home. So a switch that is similar to a physical switch is going to perform better than a switch that looks very unique and new and digital in ways that people are sort of like looking at it and being like, I don't really know how to use this. And I think where a lot of agencies go wrong is that they oftentimes work with, other kinds of companies that are building things like, like a social media startup or some sort of gaming app or other kinds of products where a user will end up interacting with that app much more frequently and multiple hours per day. Whereas with the smart home app, it needs to be incredibly simple because you're going to open it up when you need it. And if you can't figure out in a second how to do the interaction you want to do, it's going to be easier for you to walk up to the wall and switch the switch, right? So that's kind of the number one learning. How do we make sure that the app is incredibly simple to use? It leverages things you already know about before even having opened the app, things you know from having used other apps on your iOS or Android phone, and things you know from the physical world. And then we layer it on top of things like, how do we make sure that we design it around how a person interacts with the app? Like, what are the things that you're most likely to be using? Well, those are the things that you should be able to see when you first open the app really quickly. What are the things that are kind of more power user features or things that you're going to be using less frequently? Those are the things that we should be hiding away in subsequent screens, but like in logical places so that you can always still find those things. And some of those things are surprising, like changing the colors of your lights. You're not going to do that very often, but it's a cool interaction that a lot of smart light apps will put on the home screen or somewhere very close to, the experience, because it looks so cool with all these colors, right? But really, ultimately, you're going to want to have some spectrum of white for your lights on a day-to-day basis, and you want to be able to turn on and off those lights, and you want to be able to dim those lights. So those are the two features that you want to bring to the front, and then the other things are sort of like staggered or hidden in subsequent screens.
I think it is, anytime you design anything, like even a home page or something else, it's so easy, to kind of show off what you have. And just the little advice that you have, keep it simple. It's not a new advice, but there's so much wisdom in it. And especially when you talk about smart home, in my opinion, which exactly, it's not a game, it's not a social media. You just want to get it done. Because the alternative is just walking up and maybe switching a switch. Is so easy to use. You have to be even easier. That's I find that very interesting. And I was when I did a bit of preparation for this interview, I was actually surprised how some bad reviews were for some of the major smart home apps out there.
Absolutely.
So first when I heard about your idea, I thought, okay, well, this sounds interesting, but what do you actually do? But there seems to be a real market out there, right?
And from being just a very avid smart home user and then doing it even more for work purposes, I have all those apps, right? So it was something that was very, very obvious to me just because I had them all.
You were rating 1 star, right? To get this.
Yes.
Of course. Cool. So where do you stand with Kraftful now?
So we are 4 months in to our existence. So still a fairly short story for how far we've come so far. Today we have over 200, I would say, accounts or leads or in our pipeline at different stages. A few of them are kind of further where we've started some level of the development, and so kind of our first apps will hopefully hit the app stores in the spring, and then sort of obviously being an early stage startup, we're sort of already started thinking about kind of how do we scale this, how do we make this move faster, and make sure we're doing it in a mindful way so that we're still kind of solving problems in the best possible way.
So is it you and your co-founder at this point?
So it's mostly me and my co-founder. Nikki, who is the CTO, and we both met at IFT, where he was principal engineer and I was head of product. We also brought on board a designer fairly early on, also someone we worked with in the past, and so we knew that she was really talented and specifically at this space and would be able to help us pretty significantly. But so the next step is going to be to build out our engineering team and build out our sales team.
Wow. But I mean, 200 accounts in 4 months, that is quite an achievement, I have to tell you, especially in the B2B place. I find that huge. So before we talk about your go-to-market strategy, which I'm very interested in, because I think you were pretty humble because you also graduated from Y Combinator, right? A couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So that's kind of before that can't all fit in the 4 months period. Huh? That must have been before.
So we actually started. We left our jobs at IFT and started focusing on building Kraftful right when we started Y Combinator. So it was we had a different timeline where we were planning to stay at IFT for a little bit longer and wrap up a few projects. We were fairly surprised to get into Y Combinator being this early stage, because I think a lot of the companies nowadays are kind of a few years in usually, and a lot of our kind of classmates at YC were. And then, so we basically started in June, or late May of this year. And then we were sort of working on the YC timeline, which included the YC demo day where you get to show off what you've been working on to investors. And that was about, I'd say that probably is a month ago now. So it's been a hectic 4 months.
Wow, that's incredible. How did you get into Y Combinator? Was it just a pitch deck? Did you have an MVP, or was it just the application?
It was just the application. Wow. Yeah, it was just us and our ideas.
What do you think helped you get accepted? What was the number one thing that you put forward?
Yeah, I think our very crystal clear focus on a problem, the fact that we were coming at it from the perspective of, we've identified a big problem where if you solve this problem, you can have a massive impact in the world. And we had some ideas for solutions, but we were much more focused on what is the problem and being very clear about, we're going to keep iterating until we figure out what the right solution for this problem is. And our problem was based off of having talked to lots of customers and listened to what they have to say about their specific niche problem, right? I think for a lot of companies, they start off with having some idea for a solution, and they start searching for, where do I fit in this solution that I have, usually a technical solution. And I think that's something that YC is particularly uninterested in, or has become particularly uninterested in over the years. Their slogan is make something people want. And I would say actually it should be make something people need. But generally speaking, they're very focused on the companies that are going to be really, really focused on the problem, as opposed to just building things that they think are cool. You know?
And did you lead, when you said we were crystal clear on our problem that you solved, did you focus on the long term in the connectivity between connected devices, or did you lead with the smart home play?
We led with the smart home play. And so specifically, and I think we were very clear about, this will be a problem more broadly, as pretty much every household, and I don't mean household in a smart home or a home sense, but any brand that you can think about is transitioning their product to become a digital product. And in the context of that, this is going to be a much, much bigger problem outside of smart home. But we're starting with the smart home because we're so focused on specifically how do we solve this particular problem in the best possible way.
Do you think that apps are always the best solution for companies?
Absolutely not. I think, and I don't think apps necessarily will be the long-term solution, or what we will end up working on in the long term either. I think what will be the best solution over time is going to be a combination of lots of different types of interfaces, or no interfaces, right? Like the best interface is no interface. But there's always going to be software problems that hardware companies will have as they're continuing to build connected devices.
Interesting. So would voice then play into your company again?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Voice, other kinds of interactions that come with people interacting with wearables, gestures, right? Any kind of interactions that people would use to control the devices they have around them. I
see. Well, now that when you say you're so focused on the problem, then the solution that you offer, it's like a toolkit. You apply a different tool to different problems. Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screw.
Yes.
So that gives you the flexibility of solving that.
Exactly. And I think it's you kind of have to meet the market where it's at. And so today, most people will think about interacting with a connected device through an app. And so you need an app. Today you need an app, right? And most companies will think about, I'm building a connected device. There's two pieces to my device. It's the device and it's the interface that the person needs to control it. And most likely it's going to be an app. It could be a web app. But it usually is like an app. And so from the B2B angle as well, that's kind of what our customer thinks of as their problem. And then truly their users will need one kind of interface to interact with that device. And then over time, the users will evolve. They will become kind of more similar to how early adopters think today and go well beyond that. And so we're going to be thinking about what's the right solution at that time. But I think we're very focused on what problem are we solving today with the apps.
Yeah, that's smart, especially 4 months old company. I mean, that's something you can't do everything.
Exactly.
And you said you have 200 accounts at some stage. Maybe some are leads or some are agreed upon. But that seems, the thing that I get out of it is go-to-market is really important for you, to ramp up, and also probably to iterate and find those right templates. You probably need data to make sure that you find the right solution. Yeah. And I love one of your tweets that I creepishly stalked in your timeline. It says, talking with customers is key for building something people need. I think there's so much value in it, because it's so easy to get caught up in having a solution in your mind and building that, but not really talking to the market. How do you utilize this advice with Kraftful? Yeah,
so we were very clear about talking with customers from day one, or I would say day zero, really -2 maybe.
And these customers are the Philips and the consumer electronics.
It's exactly, it's the big hardware enterprises. And so what we did, in the week we left our jobs at IFT, we started Kraftful, we launched our website on a Saturday or Sunday, and then we started reaching out to folks who we knew were flying into the Bay Area for a smart home conference. And so in the first week, we were hanging out outside this conference and meeting up with all of these hardware companies, or kind of their digital PMs, or different titles that these individuals have, to try to talk with as many relevant people as possible. So that was sort of how we thought about building the company from day one. Was we need to talk with people and start articulating what our solution is, start iterating on that articulation based on talking with more and more people. And then ultimately we kind of started defining the product more, designing it so that we could demo it to customers. But very early on, it was about kind of talking with customers even before we have anything, so that we can make sure that what we end up having or what we end up building is the right thing.
But how did that feel for you? Because you're in that space, you're head of product for a very well-known company in the smart home space, and there's a conference, a lot of people coming in, and you basically go in there knowing, well, there's, you don't have a product, right? But you have to want to maybe validate hypotheses or just get some market. How did you do it? Did you just ask open questions? What happened during those interviews?
Yeah, so we actually, it was a combination of things. We did do pitches. So we would pitch the solution we thought we had. And so we very quickly put together a deck. And it was funny because for the first meeting, we're like the night before, we realized we need a deck. we need to be able to talk to people about something in particular. We can't just come in and say, so what problems do you have? Tell me about your life. And so we did have a solution that was kind of what we thought the solution was. And then we kind of watched people react to it and interact with it, and watched or listened to the questions they were asking when we were pitching them, to understand what piece of this resonates, what doesn't, and why. And then we could leverage that to kind of ask them more questions.
What I found great about this approach is, when you figure it out, you already have a list of people that you talked about this. So you can already start building your go-to-market with basically nothing, just an idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you look back, I don't know, when you look back at the thing that you pitch versus what you have now, is there a huge discrepancy between both of them?
It's not actually a huge discrepancy. It's definitely evolved quite a bit. I would say, looking back at that first week, it's actually who we talked with that's very different. I think over time, we realized that and we're still figuring this out, but who is our perfect persona has evolved quite a bit from the folks we met with in the first week to the folks we're talking with now. Some assumptions we had was we needed to focus on hardware companies that had the worst apps. We literally would go into the app store and find the apps that had 1, 2 stars, and then try to connect them to individuals at companies that were responsible for them, and then those are the people we were talking with. Over time, through doing kind of more content strategy, we started getting more inbound requests from companies. And then we realized that actually it's the companies that are not necessarily doing poorly that may work better because they're sort of, or not as poorly, because they clearly care about this more. They're a little bit more used to working with startups in various ways because they're looking for innovation in different. They just want to buy innovation. Sometimes they will even say that, and then it's they've done something to try to do things better. So they, when you tell them, here are the things we're going to do to improve your product, they get really excited and they understand how it's going to work.
Yeah, so there were two strategies. One is, creating a need for, people who may have one or two shitty apps, or one is catering to a need that is already out there with maybe apps that are a bit better, but are trying to innovate even more.
Yeah.
Interesting. But how do you, you have two customers, right? The one customer is, the company, it's B2B, but that company is doing the B2C approach and talks to their customers as well.
Yeah.
How do you, you obviously have to kind of take both into account.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
Yeah, so we're clearly a B2B2C company in that sense. And what our B2B customers care about is offering their end users a good user experience. There may be some discrepancy in terms of how they think about that good user experience, but it's our goal to explain to them how the things we're doing will actually have the desired effect, or show them through data, or kind of be able to convince them somehow that this is the right way. And sometimes maybe that means doing a bit of a compromise and then collecting data and then being able to show them and then moving one step closer. But generally speaking, our interests are so aligned, or I guess the two constituents that we're serving, their interests are so aligned that it's usually not too much of a problem.
That makes sense. Sometimes I feel when you talk to potential customers, it's very easy to get this is a great idea out of people and let's stay in touch. But it's sometimes hard to understand, especially in these very early stages of conversation, if people are actually willing to pay money for it.
Yeah.
How do you navigate this, and do you have any tips for me of how to understand if someone actually has an intent versus just saying, well, I just want to, I don't know, I'm lukewarm on this, I'm just going to say great, awesome, let's get in touch with my office and then get the hell out of there.
So I think we've been very clear about kind of filtering customers at different levels. Like, we're not going to tell anyone no, or maybe unless they really just are looking for an agency, in which case we're sort of like, well, you should probably work with an agency. But as long as they're sort of like somewhat interested in our solution, we will just figure out where they fit into the kind of their timelines. Are they going to be in 5 years or something? Then we'll get back to them at some point, right? Or do they have a more immediate need? And then when we think that they have a more immediate need, the way we move it forward faster is essentially always being very clear on next steps. Okay, so what's your timeline? What's your process for moving through your company? Because we're dealing with some very large companies. What's your process for getting a deal approved? What's your process for incorporating our product? Where in the timeline does it fit in? Kind of being having a product background as opposed to a sales background actually helps us quite a bit, because we can be very clear about, like, I know you have a product roadmap. Tell me what your product roadmap is. Where does this fit in on your roadmap, and when would you actually do it, and have you budgeted time, and do you have a budget, and all those things. So I think we dive very quickly into that kind of implementation space to understand, are they actually really serious about it? And if not, we're still going to work with them eventually when they get around to it. But I think and this is something that being a YC company has helped us a lot, because we felt the urgency of the clock is ticking towards demo day. We need to do more and more progress quickly, and so we've been very kind of focused on the customers that are likely to move with us there, as opposed to the customers who will eventually want to work with us.
let's shift gears a bit and talk about how you lead the company. So you have, we talked about this at the beginning of the interview, a fascinating career with many steps in law and small companies, startups to different verticals. So in your 4 months as a founder, for your first time founder and CEO, what did you learn in those 4 months that you hadn't learned before?
Yeah, I've learned so much. I feel like I've never, the learning curve has never been this steep ever in my life. I think I've learned a ton about enterprise sales and how to drive those forward as quickly as possible. I've learned about the importance of articulating the company vision, and as soon as the company vision has kind of shifted or changed slightly, being very clear about what is that and how to make sure that we're on the same page about that. I think in the first weeks we were a little bit more nebulous about it, and that actually made it difficult to have conversations with the outside world about what we're doing and how we're thinking about it. So being very clear about what is our vision, what are our goals, what are we trying to achieve, so that we can kind of stay focused. The last piece has been around being incredibly kind of ruthless in how I prioritize my time, our time, just generally, because time, when you're two co-founders, time is incredibly scarce, and so you kind of have to just be really focused on what are our high-level goals, and then what are the tasks that line up to those high-level goals, and is this task going to drive the number one goal forward? No, well then we're not doing it. And so kind of being that granular with everything we do, while still kind of staying connected to what are the high-level goals, has been really important.
Again, so much to unpack in your answer. Fascinating. Maybe just to follow up, what is your number one goal at the moment?
Our number one goal at the moment is to close the top sales leads that we have in the funnel right now.
And how important is storytelling to do that?
Storytelling is...
It's kind of the buzzword of the day, storytelling.
Storytelling is incredibly important for really getting them into the funnel in the first place. For being really further along in the pipeline, the key individuals we're interacting with are entirely sold, and now they're selling internally, and so it's arming them with the tools they need to sell internally, which is kind of why it means doing some of the work so that they can kind of start showing that work internally, writing things that they can use to kind of do executive presentations internally. It's just kind of creatively thinking about how do we get to as many people as possible within a organization. That also means doing lots of content strategy and thinking about how do I get to the next person within that same company, so that they've already read about what we do or heard about us, or kind of somehow understand our background a little bit better, and can trust that when their colleague comes to them and says, I've talked with this company, I really want to do this. Help me figure out how to do that within our company that has a ton of bureaucracy, essentially. Is
that the biggest hurdle that you have to take? Because you said at one point of the interview, these are hardware organizations that are trying to build a software. So organizationally, it might be not that easy to sell through to these folks, because, well, who decides it? Is it the product? Is it who do you need to talk to? Is it a C-level discussion? Is that the marketing person? Is it a product person? Who are the people in the room that make the decision to hire you guys?
Yeah. So usually our champions within the company tend to be some sort of innovation officer, or digital transformation officer, or someone who internally has some role that is defined as the product owner for a connected product line. And that individual then usually kind of is responsible for the digital interface internally. And then and they oftentimes are the budget owner for for that budget, but still need to get a ton of approvals from and buy-in from lots and lots of different stakeholders, like legal, procurement, different tech teams, folks on the hardware side as well. So there's so many different stakeholders at any point in time.
So your sales cycle is probably, we're talking about months here,
yes,
not
absolutely,
weeks.
yeah. And so the regular sales cycles for these kind of deals are around like 7 to 9 months. And what we've thought about is how do we compress that down to something much shorter, so that we can move as fast as we need to move, essentially.
So let's talk a little bit about fundraising and capital. I know that, well, you graduated from Y Combinator, so I think the deal is 150,000 for 10% of the stocks.
7%.
7%, even better. How do you think about fundraising? Is that, do you have a bit of runway with that money, or is that something that's gonna come up pretty soon?
So basically the way Y Combinator works is that you graduate from Y Combinator with YC Demo Day, and you get up on a stage and you present what your company does to a few thousand investors, and that kickstarts your fundraising process, or your raising of your seed usually. Sometimes for hardware companies, they're actually raising more like Series A because they need quite a bit of capital to build the hardware, right? So we're right in the middle of that process right now. And the way we thought about fundraising, particularly because we're still so small, is making sure we really divide and conquer. So it's a process that I'm running exclusively. And sometimes kind of larger VCs also want to talk with my co-founder down the line, but for most part, it's sort of I'm running all the pitches. And the other piece that we thought a lot about is making sure that we bring in as many angel investors that have relevant product and engineering background, so that we can kind of leverage that network to help us build our product faster, and help us recruit. Some of our angels have already started kind of finding some engineering candidates for us, and that's been pretty amazing to see just like a few weeks in. So that's been something we thought about a lot. How do we make sure that the folks that we're working with are not just a name on our cap table, but are actually going to be helpful to us in other ways?
Smart money.
Yes, exactly.
Great. So we are almost at the end of our interview. Let's move into the final block of our conversation, which is rapid fire questions.
Cool.
Okay? Feel free, you can answer as long as you'd like or as short as you'd like. It's just a bunch of questions. First question that actually my wife wanted me to ask you is, what is your morning routine? How do you start your day?
Great question. So I have a 2-year-old, which complicates a lot of my morning routine, or both complicates and simplifies in some ways, because I have to get up incredibly early. He makes me get up incredibly early. And so I get up at around 6. I actually nowadays will wake up slightly before he wakes up, check my email, respond to email from Europe, usually to try to make sure I'm on their timeline. Sometimes I will also have really early calls with Europe. A lot of our customers are based in Europe, so that means that I will just get up at 5 or 6 to have those calls. I then have breakfast with my family, and then I will work for a little bit longer, get ready and work simultaneously while
with the power of smart home.
with the power of smart home, which is really helpful. I then take my toddler to preschool, and then I come back and continue working. So it's sort of a very mixed process in the mornings, and then my husband picks him up in the afternoons.
Wonderful. What needs to happen for you to say, I'm a successful entrepreneur?
I think there's probably a number of companies that I feel like we need to serve before we feel like we truly have solved this problem for a number of companies. And when I say we're solving this problem for a number of companies, that means that we have apps, Kraftful apps out in the field for those companies, and it actually is improving engagement with their users in a significant way. So when we're doing that for a handful of companies, 5 to 10 companies, I'd say we're being successful.
Nice. How did you come up with the name Kraftful?
Great question. I think it was a play on, I'm Swedish, and so it was a play on Kraftful, which means powerful in Swedish, and Kraftful with a C in English. I, at some point, had a conversation with my mother-in-law who pointed out that if you spell Kraftful with one L, which is what we do, it actually becomes power ugly. And so it's not at all powerful anymore.
Okay.
So it may take a while before we can go on the Swedish market.
Why did you decide to found your company in the US versus Europe?
Both of us, my co-founder and I, were already based here, and we had worked for companies in the Bay Area for quite a while. So I think we feel quite established here. And for some European companies that we've been working with, they've actually said that it's helpful that we are US based, and that they feel like a lot of like the innovation is coming from the Bay Area, and so they can almost justify bringing in an external player more internally if it is a Bay Area company. Like if there's some sort of like political play involved as well, which was just kind of fascinating to me.
So it helps to tell your story that we talked about before. We are at your home, which doubles as your office right now. And the second question is where you feel at home. Was more targeted as Europe, Sweden versus here. But I have to ask you, where do you feel at home?
Where do I feel at home? I really feel at home in the Bay Area. It's interesting because I've lived in different places in the US where I haven't really felt at home. And I think the combination of this being quite similar to Europe in a lot of ways, but then also having certain aspects of innovation and creativity that even goes beyond Europe in some ways, makes me feel very much at home, because there's just so much happening here, and there's so much street art, and there's so much kind of people are always thinking about the next new thing they're going to do. That makes me feel very much at home.
What is your favorite smart home app that you can't live without?
Great question. That I can't live without. I have had lots of use for the Nest app. It's not my favorite. It's actually not a great app at all. But I've used it for lots and lots of different purposes. We have Nest cameras and thermostats all over the house, but we've used our Nest cameras for capturing great moments with our toddler or baby back in the day, for like when he first walked, to like making sure we could sleep train him well without like constantly running in the room and waking him up, and like all kinds of useful applications for Nest that goes well beyond kind of just security. I'd say that if there's one app that I wouldn't eliminate from my phone, it would be the Nest app. My favorite connected product is my Peloton bike by far. It's, I think, the one connected product that is clearly better than the non-connected version of itself. It's
the bike.
I'd say that a spinning class has all the problems. So if you have to go there, you need to get into the car, and once you're there, you need to now take a 1 hour bike ride because you've spent so much time just getting there and getting ready and all these things. But actually, a spinning class for 20 minutes is the ideal time, at least for me, in being able to do that at any point in time and get the exact same experience you would get in a classroom is quite ideal.
It's a genius idea.
It is a genius idea.
It's
an amazing product.
Amazon Home, Amazon Echo or Google Assistant?
It depends for what. So I love my Google Assistant for its smartness. I do use Alexa for ordering everything. So it is my go-to shopping tool. but I wouldn't ask it any questions because you just can't. It doesn't learn at all over time. Seemingly, there's no AI for what I can tell. I know it's not true, but it's just not.
What is the next piece of furniture that you think is going to get smart?
Great question. The one piece of furniture that is not smart in most people's homes right now, but is getting smart, is clearly the fridge. And so like basically every fridge manufacturer out there right now is putting a camera in the fridge, putting a display on the front of this fridge, like gathering data from everyone's accounts so that you have like all the family members' calendars on the fridge, and you can kind of like use it as a hub and also automatically order groceries and do all of these different things. I think that's like, when I think about all the different connected products that you see at like CES or IFA or like these different conferences, that's probably the most powerful one. I think there's probably going to be other kinds of like furniture that will be getting connectivity in them in a good way. There's some that have to do with like with babies, like that are shaking them to sleep or something, but in a good way. So the snoo, yes, the snoo. You can tell I don't have that product. But I think there's probably going to be things like that for like the elderly population that will make certain furniture connected and easier to interact with for like people with disabilities and that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably going to be a more useful application. Again, kind of quite a niche application, but probably a more useful one.
Incredibly useful.
Yeah.
I've been trying to convince people for quite some time now that it's the door. Actually, I think the front door. So I think let's look at it from an Amazon angle. They're trying to make it as easy for you to order with Prime.
I'm purchasing Ring for the same reason. Yeah. Like that's the device they get to put in your door.
Yeah, exactly. So and I think the question is, who do you let in your house to deliver packages?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I mean, and there's products like Ring, they go in that direction. But I thought, if you give a company allow a company to enter your house and maybe just put a package somewhere, you can monitor it with a camera. Yeah. That would be an incredibly powerful permission to give to a company. So absolutely. I was kind of thinking about, well, if Amazon is trying to make ordering super easy and having not kind of fighting off package theft from the front porch. I was always thinking about the front door and how to make that.
Yeah. So that is really interesting. And what they have been doing a lot is forming partnerships with like Chamberlain, so that they can get into your garage and deliver things. But you still have the kind of the problem of what if it's a refrigerated item, and how do you make sure that you can deliver that in your actual fridge? And I think there still is some hurdles between like how people perceive their homes and who and what they want in their house.
What is the number one problem you think you need to solve in 1 year from now?
In 1 year from now, I imagine it's going to be thinking about how do we best tackle the long tail of connected devices. We've now talked about some of the kind of the odd cases, but there's also like leak detectors and pool cleaners and all of these different types of devices. And I think we have a few different kind of product ideas of how we move into that space and tackle that in the best possible way. But I think that's probably going to be something we're going to be thinking quite a lot about in the year from now.
Wouldn't it be best for you to build like one super app, to kind of control everything together?
So it would definitely, but I think that what we've seen from, again, kind of mainstream users is that most mainstream users don't have a ton of different connected devices. And so if you can simplify an experience for them, ultimately it's probably not going to be an app that has it all. It's going to be an app that is very much adjusted for the one thing they're trying to do. So I think over time, it's definitely going to be consolidating a ton of different devices in a few apps that have to do with specific types of experiences like fitness or home or security. But but in the beginning, you kind of still need to have an app that is very much focused on a particular type of device to make it really, really simple for the user who uses that for the very first time, and so that they have a really successful experience.
Interesting. And the one question that I ask every guest, which is sadly at the end of our interview, is what is the best advice you've ever received?
Ever received would be really difficult to go back to, but I think the best advice I've received for my company or for our company has been from Michael Siebel, who is the YC CEO, but also was our YC partner. And he said, kind of towards the end of YC, he said that, you guys are building these companies, but in building a company, you get to decide the future. And it's not like there's some group out there that is the powerful people that get to decide what the future is going to be about. If your company is really, really successful, it will have a huge impact on how the future looks like. And it's, that's something you should think about and feel the responsibility for it to make sure that it's something you're actually really, really proud about. I think that's been really, really impactful feedback. It's something we thought about more abstractly, but he put it so concretely. That was really helpful.
That's some powerful stuff. Yeah, I'm going to think about that. Well, Yana, I had a great time. Thank you for sharing so much. We talked about your background, the smart home market, and of course, Kraftful and the way you lead the company. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing. I love the conversation.
So, das war mein Gespräch mit Yana. Mir hat es wirklich großen Spaß gemacht, mit ihr zu sprechen und wirklich ins Detail zu gehen zum Thema Smart Home. Wenn ich es zusammenfassen müsste, dann habe ich mindestens 3 Sachen gelernt. Erstens, sei flexibel und ergreife Chancen. Ich muss wirklich sagen, ich bewundere Yana dafür, dass sie Chancen ergreift, wenn sie sieht. Sie hat eine beeindruckende Ausbildung gemacht, immerhin in Harvard Jura studiert, war Professorin, um dann nochmal etwas komplett Neues zu machen mit dem Wechsel ins Product Management und dann nochmal alles auf Anfang mit dem Sprung ins Unternehmertum und der Gründung von Kraftful. Mut ist meiner Meinung nach eine sehr unterschätzte Eigenschaft, aber genau das macht digitale Optimisten aus. Zweitens, spreche super früh mit deinen potenziellen Kunden. Yana ist nur mit einer groben Ahnung, was Kraftful sein wird, so früh wie möglich direkt mit potenziellen Kunden ins Gespräch gekommen. Sie hat ihren Pitch quasi live angepasst, je nachdem, was funktioniert hat und was nicht. Das Gute daran ist, dass sie, nachdem sie es dann tatsächlich rausgefunden hat, was gut ankommt, ein volles Adressbuch hat mit Beta-Testern und Kunden. Dieser iterative Ansatz, den man auf der Produktseite ja ganz gut kennt, funktioniert genauso gut auf der Marktseite. Deshalb kann ich immer nur empfehlen, so früh wie möglich mit so vielen Leuten wie möglich zu sprechen. Drittens, konzentriere dich auf 2 Dinge beim Bau deines Produkts. Usefulness und Ease of Use, also Nützlichkeit und Einfachheit der Bedienung. Yana und ich sprechen gleich ein paar Mal darüber und wir kommen immer wieder zum gleichen Schluss. Wenn ein Nutzer einfach einen Lichtschalter anknipsen kann, dann muss es schon verdammt einfach sein, dafür eine App zu nutzen. Die nützlichsten Features müssen Front and Center sein und bitte keinen Schnickschnack noch hier und da einbauen. Wenn du dich mehr dafür interessierst, wie man ein Produkt bauen kann, worauf man achten sollte, dann findest du einen kleinen Vortrag von mir zu dem Thema auf www.digitaleoptimisten.de, in dem ich mich frage, warum ein paar Produkte solche Blockbuster geworden sind, wie zum Beispiel das iPhone, aber andere völlig unter den Erwartungen geblieben sind, wie die Handys von Microsoft oder der Sohn oder auch der Segway. So, das war's für heute. Melde dich unbedingt zum Newsletter an auf www.digitaleoptimisten.de, in dem ich die Sachen aufschreibe, die mich in der Woche bewegt haben hier im Silicon Valley. Feedback kannst du da auch gerne abgeben. Ansonsten freue ich mich auf nächste Woche. Bis dann!